Hi, everyone. Welcome to Risk and Robotics from Theory to Transformation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm really excited about this talk because we have an amazing group of panelists who bring decades of experience in this space from academic to industry practical knowledge. But before we start, a very quick introduction. My name is Niharika. I am the founder of a digital AI studio called Sarai. We work across sectors globally, but we do a lot of work in the financial services sector, from building AI products, deploying AI agents, building new ventures, customer experience, research, insights. So a whole mix of things. But we've been looking at AI and risk for quite some time now because we believe that this is really the most important function to transform if you want to enable a business's ambition to innovate. And given the opportunity of AI, I think most business leaders globally do want to innovate and imagine new possibilities of transforming their business or their customer experience. And if we can really understand how we can do that within the risk, compliance, and governance function, how can we use AI to transform these processes? We can really enable the entire organization to innovate at pace. So really excited to bring this very interesting topic and conversation with our experts today. I hope you enjoy the discussion. Thanks everyone for who's watching. Welcome to Risk and Robotics from Theory to Transformation. I'm particularly excited about this session because this is a topic that's really been on top of mind for all of us at Sarai. And before I get everyone on the panel to introduce themselves, I'd like to quickly introduce myself. My name is Niharika. I am a founder and co-founder of Sarai. My background is in AI, customer experience, digital product building, digital transformation, and we work largely in the financial services space. Having done a whole bunch of work in this area, AI and risk is really something that's a key priority for most business leaders. And today we've got an incredible panel of experts who bring decades of experience in this area. So we're going to cover everything from how do you identify risk to how do you build the right governance model, frameworks, what are the do's and don'ts and best practices. So I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot from them, and so will you. So let's kick this off. Could I please ask maybe Jennifer to kick us off by giving us a short introduction?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Jennifer Peterson. I am the Director of Model and Market Risk. I'm also part of my bank's AI committee. So we've been very involved with AI governance and making sure that we have appropriate governance set up.
Great. Thank you very much. It's great to have you, Jennifer. Ken, could I maybe look to you to continue and introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Ken King, first line risk director of AI, sitting in the consumer bank here at Citizens Bank, and I currently oversee the head of generative AI governance here at the bank.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ken. Frederick?
My name is Frederick Ciboulay. I am a consultant, been consulting for 20 years. I'm also a professor at NYU, and my background is risk management, and the last 10 years I transitioned into AI, classic AI, machine learning to begin with, and more recently Gen AI and agentic frameworks.
Great, thank you. It's great to have you on board. I want to start off by talking about risk, AI and risk identification and monitoring. We've been kind of looking at this space, and some of the key concerns that we hear from business leaders is around how do you identify the right risk and why is AI the right solution for it? So maybe Ken, I'll kick off my first question for you, which is how are you using AI to uncover emerging risks faster? Could you give us some practical examples?
Sure. Yeah, I think like most banks, I'd imagine, we've been using machine learning for probably a couple decades, mostly around the fraud space, managing like AML and the like.
And is there any other sort of cases that you're looking to explore in the next coming years, perhaps?
Yeah, we've given everyone at the bank access to M365 Copilot. And so everyone at the bank's been empowered to infuse Gen AI with their daily practices, leveraging it for all kinds of efficiencies or any types of gains like that.
Great. Okay, so I definitely want to pick your brains on that. But Jennifer, what about you? Do you have any examples of early warning systems or anomaly detection and using AI for those? Are there any tangible, practical use cases that you've been looking at?
Yeah, similar to what Ken was saying. in the fraud space, VSA, AML, machine learning has been around for some time in terms of kind of detecting abnormal patterns and learning and things like that. Where it's changing now is with agentic AI, and we're not using these yet, but what I'm seeing is within some of these systems, a lot of the work that was done by analysts, such as searching records and compiling narratives, things like that, there are now tools that can be used to kind of automate some of those things. So very similar to what Ken was saying in terms of the BSA AML space. I mean, there's other areas of the of banking that it's used for as well, like credit, a lot of like the FICO type models or things like that. There is AI within those models as well. So those were the examples that came to mind for me as well.
Oh, brilliant. And I guess maybe, Frederick, given your background and also the fact that you're teaching, that the mix of industry and academic background, I'm curious to understand, how would you kind of identify some of the current blind spots or limitations of some of the AI models in risk? So given especially the use cases that Ken and Jennifer have just identified.
I mean, I think people are familiar. So, for example, hallucination, bias, the most common problems that we find. The question is, how do you identify these hallucinations? How do you go about fixing those problems, or at least reducing their impact? So the impact cannot be completely eliminated. There is always a risk for hallucination, but you can limit it within a certain confidence level, so that the uncertainty around the output is manageable and does not present a corporate risk, basically.
Okay.
What is specific about GenAI is that GenAI is generative, meaning that the output is stochastic. So you ask twice the same questions, you're not necessarily going to get the same answer. And so you need to have specific methods to come up with a way to validate those models. And so the state of the art currently for generative AI validation is retrieval augmented generation. So the idea is to, it's also known as RAG. So the idea is to provide the model with a finite number of use cases, and or a proxy for a finite number of use cases, and use those cases to produce metrics, and those metrics are supposed to be reliable enough to allow for the transition to production of particular generative AI models.
Sorry, just on that, I just want to ask, Ken, you mentioned earlier that you have given access to ChatGPT to a lot of employees within the business. How do you, based on what Frederick is saying, what are some of the risks that you had identified and mitigated for?
Yeah, I mean, it's the responsible and like ethical AI use that kind of permeates through everything. And we've done extensive training and continue to do training. And I pretty much talk to anybody that'll listen at the bank about, proper techniques, human involvement, and not just letting folks do what they want to do. We're all in it together. We all don't want the bank to fail. So, there's a lot of the honor system, and just making sure we're empowering everybody and giving everyone access to training materials and an outlet to talk through, potential use cases and how they might want to use it.
Okay, that sounds great, and that kind of brings me nicely to the next section, which is on governance. So maybe Jennifer, I could point this question to you. So a lot of the times, what we find is that within organizations, there is a sense of we have a problem to solve, and potentially AI can solve that problem, and we need a tool for it. If we get the right tool, and that'll solve all our problems, and that's all we need to think about. So I guess, how do you kind of approach that response? And is there anything around looking at what is the problem to solve, what's the model, what's the strategy, and then finding the right tool? Or would you think that would be the right approach to say, okay, that's a tool that solves that problem, so let's just integrate that within the risk function?
So kind of thinking to take your question in a couple of different ways. So part of it, part of the question is like, how do we differentiate between what's a model and what's a tool? Then the second half would be kind of looking at it for the specific use case. So I guess I'll start with the first part of we look at every different use case to determine first if it's a model. And we classify if it's a model based on alignment with SR 11.7. So there needs to be inputs or assumptions, there needs to be quantitative processing, and then outputs like a prediction or forecast that's used for decision making or to support decision making. If it doesn't meet that definition and it's just very complex, like there could be very complex spreadsheets or code or things like that, in that case, it could be classified as a tool, but typically a tool would be something that is not making prediction or forecast or isn't necessarily used for business decision making. Now, when AI comes in, it makes it a little bit trickier because something like Copilot it's a model. I mean, a lot of AI is by definition a model, but a lot of these are not. They're used industry wide, for example. Right. So if we use it, if any other bank or financial institution is using it, there's no difference. We are actually reviewing every different use case to determine if it's a model. If it's not, it may be classified as a tool, but there's still governance over that. So I don't want to say just because it's a tool, there's not governance. We still have, we're looking at the data, we're looking at a lot of the different controls that are in place and things like that. It's just that the level of governance is commensurate for the risk, so aligned with the expectations. The other part of that, though, is what we're doing from a model risk standpoint is with each of those use cases, making sure that we're still looking at it. So even if it's a tool, if it uses AI or generative AI, making sure that the business unit knows and understands the risk. Similar with what Ken was saying, we are doing training, but the model risk sometimes has a better understanding of things like bias in training data or those kind of things. And so we are actually looking at that and working with the business units initially, like when the request first comes in before contracts are signed, so that we can get the right language in place and all of that. So, and then after it goes live, we're still doing the testing. So we're still looking at, is it continuing to perform? Is it appropriate for use? Has the business unit changed how they're using that? So just it kind of changes the landscape a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And that's really helpful because it's quite practical. So just on that, Ken, you mentioned governance and training. So love to know some of the methods that help decide the governance level for AI use cases. How do you really define a governance model for an AI use case, or is it for a department, or is it top down? So yeah, it'll just be good to get your thoughts on how do you actually go about developing a governance framework.
Yeah, and it's a two-way street, top down, bottom up. Top down's empowered the bank and all the colleagues to look for ways to enhance efficiency and leverage these tools, but making sure they have the training available and all that, so they can leverage it responsibly and ethically, and look at what might be a value add. And we have a Gen AI Council that's kind of like the front, big mesh filter, making sure it's meeting strategic goals, business value, just the basics. They don't dig too far under the hood, but they're just making sure, we don't have 3 of the same use cases floating out there. So we're not engaging 3 vendors to do the same thing for different groups. But that's kind of our first filter. And as part of that, that's kind of where I get involved. And we have a risk scoring mechanism that's similar to, Jennifer probably knows, risk tiering of your models. We do something similar with generative AI when those come through. And, I'm pretty entwined with model risk management, operational risk, enterprise risk. We all kind of work in unison. Technology, pretty much every major group at the bank's involved in this at some capacity. And it's filtering through there, making sure we identify what it is, and the definition of a use case fluctuates depending on what we're looking at, and it's pretty much everything's a conversation, just making sure management and the business understand what it is they're looking to do, what they're asking to bring in, how it's going to integrate within our network and our infrastructure, and then start talking about guardrails that might need to be in place, and then what kind of monitoring we might have in there. It's similar in nature to how we have our model risk management, was kind of the bones or the framing of the house that we used. And then I've been making a lot of tweaks with my team and some others, to go through and make sure we're appropriately grabbing these different risks. But everything's going 1,000 miles an hour, so things are changing weekly. And pretty much as soon as you write a definition or some guidance for your stakeholders, you have to rewrite it by the time it's published. So it's constantly in flux as we get more information. But that's like any good governance. It's always in flight, and you're always adapting and being agile as regulations, use cases, technology come out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And I guess, Frederick, I was really curious to learn a bit more about, you'd mentioned this earlier in our previous conversations, the 3 lines of defense model. Because to both Ken and Jennifer's point, there are different teams that manage risks in different ways. So could you just maybe give us an overview of what the 3 line of defense model is, and why is it relevant in the AI era?
Okay, so the 3 lines of defense, it's a way to describe what are the various responsibilities of different teams in a bank in particular, in a financial organization. So typically what we call the first line, the client-facing organization. So typically they own the model because for business reasons, they have developed the models. They have a model that they use, and they use that model to interact with their client. So they would be the primary owner of the model. So they develop, they test, they validate the model, and then typically they need to be authorized to put that model in production, especially in the banking industry on the sell side. On the buy side, you have a similar process, but it's not as regulated as on the sell side.
Yeah.
So the second line is the group that validates those models. So they take the documentation, they take the specification of those models, potentially they take the data, and they make sure that the model is sound, is fit for purpose. Okay, so it's called conceptual soundness.
Okay.
Then you have something. You have what's called output analysis. So the idea here is, you take the income, the data that come into the models, and you look at the output, and you make sure that output is in line with expectations. In particular, on the edge cases. Not necessarily so much on the middle of distribution. I mean, they do test the middle of distribution, but they want to make sure that the model doesn't diverge too much when you get in the edge cases. And then then there is a third process, which Jennifer mentioned also, which is continuous monitoring or continuous oversight. So the idea is to look at the model in production and make sure that there is no drift that could compromise the soundness of the model. So these are the 3 aspects. So how do you use that for Gen AI? Well, I mean, that would take me into quite a bit of details, but so you can take conceptual soundness. Conceptual soundness requires looking into the data quality and suitability. Then you look at feature engineering and selections. What is driving the models. Then you have to control the input to the model. So that's looking into the data. Then you have to look at the model design, the methodology, why the model was selected, and what are the potential assumptions. Then you need to understand how to explain and how to interpret the model. And finally, how you optimize or you calibrate parameters and hyperparameters of the model. So that's conceptual soundness. The outcome analysis, well, you identify model weaknesses. You look at the reliability or the output uncertainty,
Right.
meaning, what is the distribution around the expectation of your outcome. You look at the robustness of the model against some input noise.
Yep.
In particular, and you look also at other things like overfitting. And then you look at the resilience against distribution drift and environment change. So, if you change the context, how much that output is going to be affected. And then, you want to be able to, also validate the concept and the detection. And then you have the third party, which is the sort of part of the third pillar, I would call it, which is ongoing monitoring.
Okay.
So how do you test periodically and how do you revalidate? But there is also a process that can be more continuous, which would be, how do you look at data drift, both input and output. You look at concept drift, is there an evolution in the market that makes your old model irrelevant? And then there is the BAU model maintenance and updates. All those models, they have life cycles, they are updated on a regular basis. So how do you implement those changes without disruption to the production? So there's a concept of continuous improvement, continuous development, continuous operation. Yeah. Which come into play and which integrates basically the development phase with the operational phase.
Well, thank you. That's really helpful. And a very quick question for you, Frederick, continuing on to the description of the 3 lines of defense model, and I'll maybe ask Jennifer and Ken you the same question after. Given this process of identifying the problem, implementing the model, managing and assessing, and an improvement of the model to make decisions or to automate or whatever the purpose might be. In your work, Frederick, looking at all the banking organizations that you kind of have an oversight of, what are some of the, maybe just one best use case of AI to streamline the risk process? Have you seen like a really great case study that has worked really well to transform a particular risk process with AI?
So, so that takes us to the topic of where are we in our AI journey, right?
Okay.
So, there was this machine learning stuff. We already started to call that AI. And then there is Gen AI, generative pre-trained transformers, 2017, Attention is all you need, the paper that was published by DeepMind. And since then, there's been an explosion of paper in that field, right? This is generative AI. Okay, so what you have is you have systems that we call intelligence, but really what they do is they're electronic parrots, right? So they repeat what they've learned. So this is changing. This is evolving with what we call reasoning system. Mm-hmm. But we're still very much there. And so the idea is, how can I use AI to, where it must be the most useful is how can I use AI to cover the base, make sure that I address all the topics in a particular field, that I don't forget something. How do I use AI to, generate a framework, to generate ideas that can be useful to my job, and it's going to make me a better professional. That's going to make me a faster professional. So it's about velocity and quality. So it's really, using AI as an assistant to your daily job. That's why, I don't see AI as a separate function. I mean, 10 years ago, that's where I was looking at it, but I think that was a mistake. You know, I think AI should be put in the hands of the end users. They should be trained, they should be enabled, and then they should discover through the expertise of their field, you know, how to best use the AI and how to become faster and better at their job.
And just on that, Jennifer, would you agree with that? And is there a use case you could identify that's worked well in this space, in the risk space in particular?
Yeah, I would disagree that AI should not be its own function. The reason being that it does have, especially generative AI, there are unique risks that are outside or broader than just traditional model risk management. And so for in an area like banking where there is such strong regulation, the need to pull in different areas, to pull in compliance, to pull in HR, to pull in InfoSec to review, it's different. So to put all of that, and especially how explosive it has been, it's just been a bombardment. And to do that as somebody's like side job, it's a lot. And from my perspective, there should be, it greatly simplifies and makes things more efficient to have a dedicated area to kind of quarterback that and kind of run with it. That's part one. Part two would be a use case. And we do have a really good example. And we have an internally created or an internal RAG model that was built on top of OpenAI's ChatGPT. And what it does is policies and procedures were actually loaded in, and a front end user can ask a question. And rather than having to go out and search through, you know, numbers of different articles and things like that, it will give the specific answer. And we just looked at this as a AI subcommittee last week, and I think there were over 70,000 questions that had been posed to this. And so if you think about how much time and effort, if users were asking 70,000 questions to team leads, or, you know, and just how quick it is too, like they don't have to wait for a supervisor to come to them or answer their questions. So extremely valuable. We did have to create new documentation templates and validation / testing because it is different. So we, you know, pulled in, where is the data stored? Is there data leakage? Are there hallucinations? Kind of trending over time to make sure that there was no model drift and established monitoring. So a lot of what Frederick was saying from SR 11.7, it still applies, but it needs to be modified for generative AI because you can't go in and do a model validation the way that we've traditionally done it. We have to have InfoSec, you know, help us to test data leakage. Hey, compliance, not in this case, but, you know, look at, well, actually they did look at the answers. Do you see any concerns with this? And so that's the best example I can think of. We have many others, but that one's been very successful.
Oh, that's brilliant. And that's actually just a really great place to start, isn't it? Because there are lots of institutions that are saying, hey, we need to use this, but where do we start? And this is such a great place to do that because you can if I can say it, you can contain it a lot more because you have the policies and defined, and it's just really making sure it can deliver the right answer and pick the right segments for you depending on what you're asking it. So it seems like a more contained risk.
That's exactly, and that's why we did it that way. It was, we have training that, you know, the users have to do before they can actually use it. And then it was kind of like, we knew that it was on the horizon. It's kind of just dipping our toe in, learning from it, and then being able to leverage that experience and apply to other riskier or more risky, I would say, use cases.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Jennifer. And Ken, so just, I guess, asking you the same question. What is there a really great use case you could share with us where you've seen AI being very successfully applied to a risk process?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm more in line with Jennifer's thought process and how we have to handle all this too. You know, we have, like most banks, we have a centralized like change management process looking at any process changes and things along those lines to get risk assessed and, you know, make sure we're pulling in the right different groups, you know, InfoSec and all that. And like AI itself it doesn't introduce new risks, but it exacerbates existing risks to, you know, make them a little more stringent and have require a little more oversight and thought, like data protections and things like that, and pulling in InfoSec, she brought up. And so we don't have any direct use cases for like streamlining a risk process itself, but I know like for my, personally, and what other groups are, again, going back to Copilot, we all have access to it for, summarizing our emails, meeting transcriptions and recordings and all that. It's extremely helpful. And, I use it you can use it to start, kickstart your process mapping,
Yeah.
to go in your documentation, rewrite. I use it to rewrite my guidelines and procedures, make them a little more succinct, because there's so much going on. You're getting so much feedback. It's very easy in this space to kind of over document what your process is. And so, Copilot's been very helpful with that.
Yeah,
So it's kind of
absolutely.
streamlining my governance process by making my requirements a little more tight. Um, so it's kind of, I
Yeah.
guess you could say it's like an indirect streamlining of the risk process.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, no, absolutely. Copilot is very, very helpful in optimizing those tasks that you can spend a little less time on, and cumulatively it makes your work better. But one thing that's come up quite a lot in the work that we're doing in this space, as well as the conversation now, is creating fluency and understanding across employees on how to use AI, whether it's generative AI, like how does that work? How do you identify a good response? How do you flag the risk? But also there is this education required, I guess, across industries, not just in financial services, on what is AI, how does it work? People, know it at a very high level, in a very high level way. So I guess, Ken, again, maybe asking you that question because you brought it up earlier on. You mentioned training. So how are you creating that digital fluency? Are you running courses? Are you bringing in external people? Are you doing it weekly? And what is it that training is includes to create that level of fluency?
Yeah, I mean, all of that, pretty much. We
Okay.
have a pretty extensive e-learning platform that we use, where we have access to every kind of training. There's like 10,000 or so trainings on there, just going through basic business trainings like business writing, presentation skills, time management, all the way up through like generative AI specifically, or AI data governance, like all those good things. We also use DataCamp, and you can take, AI learning journeys in there. And, when our generative AI started kickstarting earlier in 2024, we identified quickly there was a need to get everyone on board, because what's different from more of the traditional model space to using AI is pulling in all of these first line business functions that are not in a negative connotation but ignorant to risk management in some
Yeah.
aspects. They're not
Yeah.
used to thinking pessimistically about every single service they're
Yeah.
bringing in. And that's what I tell some folks. I'm pessimistic at work and optimistic at home, being a risk manager. But it's thinking through all of that, and it's the training aspect is getting those more first line people up to speed with what the whole second line function or first line risk is looking at and why we're looking at it.
Yeah.
And so we tapped some folks and created a smaller working group, with folks across different disciplines, and came up with what a good learning journey would be. Like, what are some basics that we need to tackle, and created kind of a learning path, that would be rolled out over time. And when our Copilot released, we released a bank-wide training that went out to everybody that was required. And it was on our centralized platform that we have most of our regulatory and compliance trainings that are required. So there's tracking and reporting on that. And so we did that, and that's how we rolled it out. So we could make sure folks were looking at it and completing it, and there was a timeline to get it done. And we have more rolling out in a similar fashion. I know I created, and recorded and saved some out there on just our process. So like internally, how to complete, and what requirements are and where to go to do what. That I can update on the fly. I can also track. So if I'm seeing some groups not responding over time as part of my governance check, I can go and see, did they take those trainings or watch those videos, and point them there if I find they're having trouble with a certain aspect of the process flow or anything like that.
Yeah. So training is a really integral part of
Yeah.
governance and management of that. And then just very quickly, Frederick, are you witnessing from your perspective that there is a need to hire expertise from outside of organizations, experts in AI, whether it's AI engineers, AI product managers now, and a whole bunch of individuals who have expertise and skills in that area, whether it's machine learning or AI? Or are you finding that there is greater importance placed on upskilling internally?
Well, so I think there is a combination of both.
Yeah.
You have to have, I think you have to have an organic growth of AI within the organization. So people have to be exposed to classes, and they have to learn these new technologies. So I think a training program is great. And then depending on the organization and the type of projects they want to do, sometimes they do have the expertise internally, and sometimes they don't. So they have to tap into the consulting market, where you have typically organizations that may be a little bit more advanced because they have exposure to other industries, and they have, it's their business to be more specialized in that space, so they can support organization. So there was, this MIT report that came out a couple of weeks ago that was explaining that 95% of the projects have no return on investment.
Yeah.
And many people are surprised that the report came out with that conclusion. The report is based on a 6 months return on investment, and we know that the introduction of any new technology has costs involved, right, at the beginning. And that cost can be pretty high for AI because of all the infrastructures, the governance frameworks, the data, cybersecurity. All the things that we were talking about. And therefore, they slow down and they constrains the evolution and the return on investment on those projects. So it's a space where I think external consultants can help because they have the templates, they have the experience, they have the expertise, they already have the training, so they can jumpstart those projects and make them more cost effective from the get-go. So I think there is a market for that.
Right. Which makes sense.
It depends on each organization.
Yeah.
I'm sure they are in the journey.
Yeah. No, thank you. That makes sense. And Jennifer, I seem to ask you questions in two parts, so I'll continue that, but I'd be keen to understand how are you seeing this kind of training that Ken mentioned for non leaders who are not part of the risk compliance or governance departments? Are you seeing that being done in a similar way as Ken mentioned?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think having end user training is really important, but it is new to other areas. So kind of targeted training for leaders in different disciplines, because something like, I could say, is there bias in the training data? But other areas might not know what that is. And so we've done some targeted training for leaders. Another thing is that we have an AI committee that's comprised of the heads of different areas. And so they're learning in that forum as well. So end user training, targeted training for key areas like HR, legal, compliance, areas that so that they know and understand that the risks associated with AI. Those are probably the biggest ways that we're doing it, similar to how Ken described it as well.
And the second part of my question was going to be, what kind of other departments would you first prioritize? So in an organization such as yours, are fairly large, right? So would there be certain departments you'd absolutely go, say these are the first few employees and teams that need to get trained above everyone else?
One key area I would say is third-party risk and legal. And so in terms of the contracts and making sure that there is contract language in place, so that we don't have vendors just popping up AI or generative AI and there are notifications. So that would be a key area. HR would be a key area. InfoSec. I mean, a lot of the areas know, and they're really on top of it and things. But I do think that the third-party risk and vendor is a really key area, and probably even become even more so as we go forward.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So just want to take the next 10 minutes to just cover some of the key other areas that we've touched upon, but haven't delved into. So the first one is model risk, explainability, regulatory expectations. I think the third point being really, really important. So maybe, Jennifer, I can continue the discussion with you and just ask you, what level of explainability is acceptable? You mentioned it initially, to point out what is right and what's wrong, but how do you kind of determine the model explainability?
Yep. And so we have, for any model within model risk that has AI or machine learning, we have additional areas that need to be covered in terms of explainability. And for those that might not be familiar, explainability is really just the extent to which AI decision processes and outcomes are reasonably understood by the model users or those that are using the outputs. And so from a MRM standpoint or model risk, it really depends upon the type of model that's used. So if it's something like linear regression, we're gonna need to know each of the different variables that are feeding in, how those affect the outputs. For something like generative AI, it's probably not going to be as clear. Like, you don't know necessarily why it hallucinates or gives an answer that's not real. It's like a human, but to conduct the testing, and there are kind of controls that you put in place. And so the example I mentioned earlier about the internal RAG model, we include the source on there and include the rationale as to why the tool or why it gave the output that it did. And so there are ways around that, and it ultimately depends on the risk of the riskiness and the type of model or tool that's being looked at.
Brilliant. And Ken, I'm curious to just on following through on Jennifer's last point, I'm curious to also understand from you, because you've spoken a lot about governance, what additional Gen AI governance controls are most valuable for us to consider for anyone who's kind of looking into the space right up after the RAG model?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's the back-end monitoring, I think, is going to be huge, which you do for models. You do performance monitoring. A lot of these generative AI tools coming in, you're not really necessarily creating a forecast all the time or a projection where you can just back into some math and do a quick metric evaluation and know, and can pinpoint exactly where some things went, askew. Here it's, Gen AI is the new shiny thing. And so it's very easy for a group to romanticize the last 3 or 6 months when they might think they're getting efficiency because they got a new fun tool and they're not really noticing. But, being able to take a step back, be objective, and just look at the cold hard facts, I think has the potential to maybe shine some light on how useful these tools and services actually are. And a lot of that is just focused on business outcomes. And I ask this pretty much every conference call I'm on, what folks are looking at for some of these things, and it all comes back to business outcomes, which are basically expert judgment driven, because you can't necessarily grab a metric to look at those, but it's making sure you're keeping track of your prompts. You have a human in the loop or on the loop, looking at these things to make sure the output is constantly in check. Because while OpenAI might publicize when they're retiring one of their models and kicking a service that has to adopt a new updated version, the service provider, those vendors, could also be tweaking their RAG or other logic that they've built around the tool that model that they're leveraging that's underpinning their service. So consistent, ongoing monitoring and checking is key there. The other two items I've already mentioned, and I think we've all mentioned a few times, having some required trainings around all this to make sure folks understand what's going on, and that upfront Gen AI council that I mentioned earlier that we have. That's kind of that first intake filter, because that's basically like a vetting board. It's helping the business understand and talk through like what they're requesting and making sure that is Gen AI the answer here, and they're fully understanding what they're asking for and thinking through some of those guardrails that we might have to put in place because of the additional or exacerbated risks that might be involved with this. Because sometimes you're taking a simple process, and now you might be introducing new risks, but not new because AI has new risks, but you might be now just introducing data risks just in general, and AI is just exacerbating that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. And then it sounds like that there is one approach which could become highly prescriptive, where you can almost dictate what and control how one engages with models, how they're making decisions using these models. And another one could be very much principle-based. You mentioned the responsibility aspect, Ken, earlier. It can be, you should be responsible, you should practice your own judgment. So Frederick would be really interested in knowing how do you balance that? And you've mentioned the principle-based versus a prescriptive-based framework. So how do you kind of execute that across teams? Should you be more prescriptive? Should you think about it more principally? And what does that look like? What would good look like?
I think principle-based methods tend to be more effective, because you simply cannot control everything. You cannot prescribe everything. So I think that's the way forward. But there's always a number of prescriptions that you need to have. It depends at which level you put it, right? So for example, when you're talking about a GRC framework, a governance, risk and control framework, typically itself is very prescriptive, but the content can be conceptual and describe the principle. It can be principle based. So it's a combination of both, and it depends at which level you apply it. It's a balance between the two, and it depends where in the process you are and at what level of the organization and how deep you go into the organization.
Okay, and then I just want to spend the last few minutes talking about something that's really important, which is around biases. And maybe Jennifer, how do you guide your model to pick up on biases? How do you create that awareness on biases as well when employees are using AI tools and models, especially in areas like hiring or decision making for policies?
Yeah, we turned off that functionality,
right.
and because until we had actually fully tested it, we had access to the data, we could actually look at it and actually validate it independently. We actually turned that off. So we're taking a pretty cautious approach that if we're not able to look at that, if we're not able to, test for bias and get a better understanding, then we won't use it. And so for something like hiring, that is potential for discriminatory outcomes, and don't even want to go down that path. So that's been turned off. It is included as part of the generative AI or AI review. Actually, it's included now for all validations. And so we include that in terms of the model documentation. We gather the information, and then as part of the validation or testing process, we're actually doing an even deeper dive. So it's second line review and looked at very closely.
Fantastic. Okay, that's really interesting. And what about yourself, Ken? What recurring tests or checks are put in place from your perspective to identify and prevent biases or drifts?
Yeah, it basically gets back to that ongoing monitoring is the big one. Just constantly checking to make sure these things are producing output that makes sense, having human involvement, again, being in or on the loop. And a lot of these is pretty high up on our requirements there for most of these.
Okay, brilliant. I want to just wrap up with just two questions. Jennifer, which AI capabilities would you greenlight in the next 12 months, and which one would you keep in pilot?
So I would think of it in terms of like both the risk and the benefit. So those that are low risk, high, high efficiency gains would be ones that I would say absolutely. So something like using Copilot, the meeting notes. I mean, that's something that has a very, very high value. I think that there's a lot of benefits from that. Or, a lot of the search and retrieval, the RAG models, if there's very limited risk, transcription, call transcriptions, document summarizations, things like that, that you have a human in the loop, low risk, easily move those forward. Where I think it needs to be kind of more closely monitored over the next 12 months are things that are like customer facing. So there are bigger risks if you put generative AI right in front of a customer. Just the risk of hallucinations, of incorrect disclosure, things like that. And so where there's direct customer involvement, I think that we have more to do, or other things that have high risk. So to use it for something like compliance or where the risk isn't known, I think would be, we would have to do a lot more to be able to roll that out.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Ken, can I ask you the same question? Which AI capabilities would you green light and which ones would you keep in strict pilot?
Yeah, I think actually my answer is pretty much exactly the same as Jennifer's. Pretty much any of these like empowerment and process efficiency plays are going to be easy wins. A lot of them are low risk, high reward. Speeding up a lot of the support processes, because even with all the amount of technology we have, there is still some kind of mundane, monotonous chunks of a process flow that could be sped up a little bit. And then you have more time for client interaction, risk management, innovation, all the good stuff that you want your employees to be thinking about and doing. And looking at strict pilot or no go customer facing, just because of the risks that are involved there, and agentic type systems, because I don't think we're there, as Frederick was getting to. Those are going to be hard sells, and even if there was maybe the initial maybe on some of those, it's going to need very, very thorough testing up front. It's going to most likely drag it out, and I'm sure the contract negotiation side of things on those of a vendors involved is going to be pretty intense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. And I guess my last question, given that Frederick, you had earlier mentioned you actually often you never get the same response back when it comes to Gen AI. So you have to kind of understand where and how it's formulating its responses. So I guess my final question would be if you could complete this sentence where Gen AI in the risk space, in the risk function space, would be successful when? Like, how do we make that successful? What does it need to do to be successful in that space?
So that's, if I understand the question, it's how is Gen AI going to change the risk management in the sense of market risk, credit risk, operational risk? I think there are 4 domains where we're going to see an evolution. I mean, more than that, but let's try to reduce a little bit the dimensionality.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the first is we're going to move from a pure numbers-based game to a narrative games. So we're going to express the risk in terms of sentences of text rather than pure numbers. So you can create a hierarchy, a level of importance. You can put the data in a particular context. You can start to introduce causality, and this is all because of LLM essentially, or GPTs, I should say, generative pre-trained transformers. Okay, where you have embedding of the information into a vector database.
Okay.
So I don't mean to get too technical, but that's why it's changing the game from numbers to narrative. The second one is I think we're going to go from a pure financial to a physical environment. So we're going to be able to understand better the supply chain and the causality. So when they are changing correlations, when there is causality in the relationship between production and supply and competitors and clients, how do you go, how do you use 10Ks and 10Qs and 8Ks to extract information specific about the enterprise and see how it's connected into the broader context of the industry where they operate. So that's why, it's not so much purely financial as it is right now when you look at the balance sheet or the income statement or pure P&L projection, and it's going to become more physical. The third aspect is we're going to go from static models, where you define a framework and you apply that expertise into this particular framework over and over again to systems that are more dynamic. So to take a simple example, when you talk about P&L, movement of price from one day to the next, really what you want to do is you want to understand the price evolution of that price and why it goes down, why it goes up, what is driving these movements. So what are the dynamics? How the price of a stock or the price of a bond is related to other factors that may be systemic or idiosyncratic. So that's the third aspect. And then a very fundamental aspect also, the fourth aspect is, I think we're going to move from analysis of history to scenario based on future, on prediction. Because those LLMs, they enable us to really take forecasts, to take hypothetical scenarios, and to look from the future and come backward to today and understand what is the impact, short-term impact of the performance of the enterprise. So, for me, these are the four aspects that I think are going to change in risk management in the next, 2 to 5 years.
That's brilliant, fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Jennifer, could I get your perspective on this as well, please?
Sure. So I wrote down the sentences: generative AI will be most successful when. So I would say it will be most successful when it's delivering the rapid insights or efficiency gains that are promised, and when it's integrated successfully within risk framework, or seamlessly, I would say, within risk frameworks. And so I think right now it's a challenge because there's not a lot of specific guidance around that. And so a lot of it's not prescriptive. I guess it's the earlier discussion, but once it's actually seamlessly integrated, all areas know and understood, and we're able to achieve the efficiency gains that are promised, to me, that's when it will be successful.
Brilliant, thank you. Ken.
Yeah, the sentence I had dropped down was, be successful when there's a top-down culture of responsible AI use with your users having a basic understanding of what these technologies are, and then we can start comfortably tapping into some agentic capabilities that are, I think, really just exponentially lift on the empowerment and efficiency gains.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That brings us to the end of the session, but thank you for sharing all your insights. And it's been really interesting for me to hear very different perspectives on this topic. We've covered everything from AI and risk definition and monitoring to governance frameworks to operational risk automation to model risk and explainability. We've also spoken about biases. And my kind of three big themes that came out, just to summarize, is the idea of top-down and bottom-up implementation is really key. So it's culture change, and without that, we're not going to succeed. It's training, it's really creating a level of awareness. The second point is, while we are bringing in a lot of AI tools to improve efficiency, for example, which is a low-hanging fruit, help people do their jobs better, faster, more efficiently, reduce errors. At the same time, we have to improve human expertise to always be able to make those decisions, say, am I able to, does that look right to me? So there is a risk, obviously, of creating dependency on AI tools because they make your life so much easier and you can just take the answer and get on with it. But that really isn't the case, especially in the context of our conversation. We have to get even better. And that's, I think, going to be quite important. And that's one of the things that I took away from that we have work to do in order to keep getting better. And the last thing was really just moving into this whole idea of predicting what can happen next, and being really using AI to stay a step ahead. So whether it's being able to imagine new possibilities, innovate, predict new scenarios, imagine new risks at scale really quickly, that seems like a fantastic opportunity for us to really reimagine, if I can be a bit more philosophical, a financial institution's relationship with its customers, with money, and how we want to manage and run a business. So I think that, as a bank, how do you want to run that? I think that those are really fantastic possibilities that could open up in the near future. So thank you for sharing all your perspectives. I've learned a lot. So thank you for taking time. And I hope you enjoyed our conversation as well.
Thanks very much. Very much. Thank you.
Been fun.